guys, we talk about it all the time around here, but I just want to remind you again that our big dream at Meadow Heights is to equip people to become an unstoppable source of God's love that changes our world. It's on the wall. It's a big deal to us. And when we think about this idea of becoming an unstoppable source of God's love that changes our world, we often think about it in terms of the metaphor of a conduit. Like we receive love from God, and then we allow that love to flow through us to other people. And that is a helpful metaphor. But as I was preparing for this message this week, I began to picture kind of a different metaphor that's been helpful to me lately. I began to picture it as the Mississippi River. Now, hear me out, not the Mississippi River that's like muddy and full of radioactive mutant fish. That's not the part I'm talking about. About a month ago, I was visiting my sister and my brother-in-law. They live at the Wisconsin-Minnesota border near the headwaters region of the Mississippi. And if you've never been there, it's a beautiful area, just gorgeous. And we were on a drive one day, my mom and dad were with us, and we pulled over at what's called Lake Pepin. It looks like a big lake, but it's actually part of the Mississippi. It's the widest portion of the Mississippi River. And we just sat there and enjoyed a beautiful day watching the 6 or 7 sailboats just kind of peacefully, slowly made their way across the water. And it struck me how wildly different my perception of the Mississippi River and its impact would be if I only ever saw this small part of it. At the headwaters region of the Mississippi, where it starts in Lake Itasca, the average flow rate is actually only 6 cubic feet per second. Which means if you were just kind of slowly strolling along the side, you'd still be at double the pace of the water. But by Minneapolis, it's up to 12,000 cubic feet per second. And by the time it dumps out into the Gulf in New Orleans, it is at 600,000 cubic feet per second, which is part of why we gave it the nickname, right? The mighty Mississippi. Now, this network of tributaries that make up the Mississippi River Basin, they provide water for literally tens of thousands of people and countless animals and crops. So much of nature's flourishing in the central region of our country is empowered by these large and small bodies of water that are all oriented toward the Mississippi River, directing their flow. And I started to think, what if we imagined becoming an unstoppable source of God's love, like this network of tributaries, with God as the central river? Because we know that God's love is already flowing in the direction of every single human being we meet. And his love is capable of providing abundantly for all of our needs. And when we join God in what he's already doing in the world, and we begin to cultivate love for someone that he puts in our path, we're kind of like one of the tributaries that's joining up with the main river. And as other Jesus followers begin to follow God's promptings and they too join what he's doing, they're like additional tributaries. And the more of us that join up with that main river, the more the truth and impact of God's love in our neighborhoods become undeniable. And more of our neighbors begin to flourish. Our whole goal as a faith community is that we're equipping each of us to become like individual tributaries of love that are joining up with the healing flow of God's love at the center of everything. And as more and more of us move in that direction, then the whole region that we flow through will begin to flourish as it experiences this unstoppable network of God's love. And the good news for those of us who have committed ourselves to this and are on this journey of becoming an unstoppable source of God's love is that there's no brokenness or need that we're going to encounter in our world that God doesn't already see and care about more than we do. And because he is already present and working to bring his healing love to every situation, we get to partner with him to meet the needs of people and places around us in practical and impactful ways. Now, for the last 3 weeks, we've been talking about what it looks like when we as followers of Jesus embrace the practices of Jesus to bless the people and places where we live, work, learn, and play. And this blessing way of life is like a hallmark of our identity as children of God. It began all the way back in Genesis when God established his covenant with Abraham by saying, I will make of you a great nation and I will bless you. I will make your name respected and you will be a blessing and all the families of the earth will be blessed because of you. And then thousands of years later, Jesus arrives on the scene and he gives us the most perfect example of what it looks like to live a blessed lifestyle. Because everywhere he went, people and places that he encountered were transformed forever. And then after his death and resurrection, he leaves the early church with a mission that they're to follow his example and live and love others in ways that bless the world in his name. And that's still our mission as Jesus followers. We have this acronym we've been talking about that helps us zero in on some of the practices that we see Jesus engage in regularly as he blessed other people. And appropriately, it's B-L-E-S-S, bless. So if you've missed the beginning of this series and you're just jumping in, I'm going to run through them real quick so that you know what they all stand for, and we have these signs to help us on the stage. So the B is the first one. That stands for begin with prayer. At the beginning of his ministry, Jesus started with spending time alone with God, just praying and fasting and aligning his heart with his Father's heart. And so if we're going to live as Jesus in the world, we too should begin with prayer. We should ask God to show us where he's already working and how we can join him in it. And then the L stands for listen. So once we've asked God to show us what he's up to in our neighborhoods, then we go through our days with the posture of a listener, and we keep our ears open to hear the needs of people and places around us and to hear God's prompting for how we can join him in what he's doing. And then the eat we talked about last week, right? Jeremiah reminded us that in a world full of increasing loneliness, isolation, and division, intentional shared meals have the power to transform us. He said eating together removes barriers, it builds bridges, and it communicates belonging like almost nothing else can. And then the first S stands for serve. We're going to talk about this one a little bit more today, but if we're doing the praying, the listening, and the eating, we're eventually going to get opportunities to serve the people and places around us, right? So we're going to come back to that. And then when we're practicing all these things regularly, we see that we get to the last S, which is story. Basically, when we're living this kind of lifestyle, we'll eventually get a chance to hear the stories of our neighbors. We may get a chance to share our own story and the big story of God and how he's been at work in our own lives. Now, these 5 practices didn't come out of nowhere. We see them in the life of Jesus. So when we talk about learning from Jesus, how to love like Jesus and live as Jesus in our world, we want to mirror what Jesus does as he blesses people in the course of his everyday rhythms. So each week we focused on one of these blessed practices, and we look at how it plays out in Jesus' life, and then we imagine, how can this play out in my life when I'm practicing living like Jesus? So today we're going to zero in on the first S, serve. And there is no doubt that serving others was a huge part of Jesus' lifestyle. In fact, he says it's why he came. In Mark 10, he told his disciples, "For the human one didn't come to be served, but rather to serve, and to give his life to liberate many people." When we read the Gospels, they are full of examples of ways that Jesus served others. But we're going to look at just one specific example today, and we're going to dig deeper into how he served a man that he met along a trip as he was traveling one day. And the good news that we're going to see in this story is that there's no brokenness or need that we're going to encounter in our world that God doesn't already see and care about more than we do. Because he's already present and he's already working to bring his healing love to every situation, we get to partner with him and join up with him to meet the needs of people and places around us in practical and impactful ways. So let's jump into the story in Mark 7. It says, after leaving the region of Tyre, Jesus went through Sidon toward the Galilee Sea, through the region of the 10 cities. And some people brought to him a man who was deaf and could hardly speak, and they begged him to place his hand on the man for healing. Jesus took him away from the crowd by himself, and he put his fingers in the man's ears. Then he spit and touched the man's tongue, and looking into heaven, Jesus sighed deeply and said, "Ephphatha," which means open up. At once his ears opened, his twisted tongue was released, and he began to speak clearly. Jesus gave the people strict orders not to tell anyone. But the more he tried to silence them, the more eagerly they shared the news. People were overcome with wonder, saying, "He does everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and gives speech to those who can't speak." Now, the first thing that we want to notice in this story is that Jesus served the people that he encountered just in the course of his everyday life rhythms. The story tells us that he served people that were in close proximity to him. He was on this journey, and along the way, some people bring a man to meet him that has a need, and so he takes the time to serve him. I think sometimes it's easy for us to watch the news, and we see the horrible things that are happening in the world, And we can get overwhelmed by that and think somebody should do something about it. And so maybe we find a way to donate some money, or we share a post to raise some awareness, and those things are not bad in and of themselves. But the ironic thing is that oftentimes there are needs in our own community, maybe even in our own subdivision, and we hesitate to do something in the name of like minding our own business. Or honestly, like I'm as guilty as the next person. Sometimes I just get so caught up in my own tasks and my own needs that I don't see the stuff right in front of me, you know? But Jesus was always noticing what was going on around him. He was always noticing the needs of people around him, especially the ones that the rest of the crowd ignored or walked right by or silenced even. He wasn't so caught up in trying to get where he was going that he missed the opportunity to serve this man that he met along the way. And this is why it's important for us to begin with prayer. Because when we pray for the people and places that are right in front of us, God begins to open our eyes to the needs and the ways that we can serve. So Jesus served people in proximity to him. But the next thing we notice in this story is that he served the man perceptively. I love this detail in verse 33. It says, Jesus took him away from the crowd by himself. Now, Mark doesn't tell us why he did that in this passage, but it's a fair assumption to say Jesus was not afraid for people to see him do something miraculous. Because if you know your Gospels and you read back the chapter before, Jesus had just fed 5,000 people from like one kid's lunch. So that was pretty public. He's clearly not afraid of being known for what he's able to do. And the friends that brought the man to Jesus, they obviously knew about his miracles already, because that's why they're bringing the man to him. He knows that he can heal their friend. You have to wonder if maybe Jesus was bringing this man away from the crowd because he perceived a need the man had that was beyond just his obvious need. This was a guy who was deaf. He had a serious speech impediment, and in all likelihood, he probably spent the majority of his life being ridiculed for the way he attempted to speak. And Jesus, in this moment, refuses to make a spectacle of him again. He takes him aside, he leads him away from the onlooker, and he addresses his need personally. If we're going to model the way that Jesus served, these previous three practices of prayer and listening and eating are so crucial because they help us develop that kind of perception. They give us the opportunity to connect to God and hear from his Spirit. They give us the opportunity to develop relationships with people and hear their stories so that we begin to see the needs beyond just the surface needs. We see what's going on socially and emotionally and spiritually. Jesus served people perceptively, but he didn't just perceive the man's suffering in his experience here, he also feels it personally. Mark says, looking into heaven, Jesus sighed deeply. Now, that's kind of a weak translation of the original word. The original word is more like an intense groaning that Jesus did. Jesus is meeting the man in the reality of his pain. He's taken him off to the side, and he's seeing him for all that he's been through. He's empathizing with him. This became personal for Jesus. He wasn't just another task to be checked off the list. N.T. Wright describes this beautifully and how important this is in the story. He says, healing then, and perhaps healing now, though we don't always recognize it, can never be simply a matter of correcting a few faults in the machine called the human body. It always was and is, and perhaps supremely so in Jesus' actions, a sign of God's love breaking into the painful and death-laden present world. Jesus saw him. He felt personally. He was courageous enough to take on the full weight of this man's suffering. He didn't just efficiently check him off his list and get back on his journey. And if we're living and loving like Jesus, it's going to get personal for us too. When we begin serving people up close and we get to know their story and we perceive their real needs, we begin to feel the magnitude of their pain, and that can be overwhelming. This is where it's so essential to remember the good news that we're talking about today. That when we're in that moment and we feel overwhelmed by the pain of someone's need, there is no brokenness or need we're going to encounter in the world that God doesn't already see and care about more than you do. And because he's already present and working to bring his healing love to every situation, our job is just to join him in what he's already doing to help meet the needs of people and places around us in practical and impactful ways. So when things get personal for you and your heart starts to break, and for the needs of the people and places around you, we have hope because God sees and he knows, he cares, and he is already at work there. We just get to join him in what he's doing to bring healing and hope in that situation. So Jesus serves people in proximity. He serves them perceptively and personally. But we also see in this story that Jesus served people powerfully. Notice how this plays out. Looking into heaven, Jesus sighed deeply and said, "Ephphatha," which means open up. And at once his ears opened, his twisted tongue was released, and he began to speak clearly. That's pretty powerful. But I love the little detail about how Jesus looks up into heaven. He's not acting alone here. He's working with his all-powerful Father to heal this guy in a life-transforming way. And I know it's easy for us to read these stories and think, yeah, but he's Jesus. He can do things I can't do. And that's true. You can't in your own power. But God can. And remember, we're not trying to make something happen on our own power here. We're joining him in what he's already doing in the person's life. He already loves them. He wants good things for them. And partnering with God is not about us trying to take control in the situation and force what we think is best for them. It's about us making ourselves available to his Spirit and then being willing to faithfully respond to whatever he shows us. And sometimes it's going to seem small. Sometimes it'll seem counterintuitive to us. I love the story Brian told in week 1 about Beth Moore, who sees the disheveled guy in the airport, and she's like, oh, I'm going to have to witness to this guy. And God just asks her to brush his hair. She had no idea where that was going to lead. She trusted God to be in charge, and she joined him in what he was doing. We may not see or understand the full impact of the things that we do to serve at the time, but we can trust that there will be powerful results. Maybe it's in the person we serve. Maybe it's somebody who's like a bystander that sees what's happening. And maybe it's what happens in our own hearts when we follow God's prompting and we serve. But we can trust that powerful things will happen. In fact, Jesus himself said, I assure you that whoever believes in me will do the works that I do. They will do even greater works than these because I am going to the Father. When we respond to what God is doing in and around us by serving others in our proximity, perceptively and personally, we can trust the power of God's love embodied through us. Because there is no brokenness or need we're going to encounter that he doesn't already see and already care about more than we do. And he's already present and at work to bring his healing love to the situation. So we just get to partner with him to meet the needs of people and places around us in practical and impactful ways. In the course of preparing for this message, I was thinking about this family that I know. They started out as just acquaintances that we were around fairly often because of life stuff. And over time, with opportunities to pray and listen and eat, they've become more like friends. And the last couple of years have been really rough on them. They've gone through some work challenges followed by personal relationship challenges, and now one of them's facing a pretty serious health issue that's impacted their life suddenly. And we've tried to find little ways to support and encourage them along the way, but it's been hard to know what you can do that would make a difference. And recently, perhaps not coincidentally, in the context of having begun with prayer, listened, and ate, Craig brought up that he had this idea that he had always wanted to just kind of show up and surprise them by taking care of some little things around their business that they just are so overwhelmed with other things, and doctor's appointments right now, they could never get to them. And we started talking about things we could do, landscaping, minor maintenance stuff, the stuff that they can't get to right now. And the more we thought and prayed about it, the more excited we got to find a way to practically serve these people we care about. And then we started to realize that there were all these other people in our life who had also seen what they were going through. And they've also been praying about ways that they could help. So we're like, well, we could talk to them and we could see if we could get them in on this too. And our kids were at the meal with us, so they hear us talking and they start getting excited and looking around and seeing ways that we could help. And I don't know exactly what God's going to do with it yet. I just know that our responsibility as a family is to respond to the invitation that God put in front of us. We just get to join him in what he's already doing and see the ways that he's going to bring his healing love into the life of somebody that we care about. And I'm really encouraged when I think about it because I can already see the ways that God's already been at work in their life. Craig and I and the boys, we're just like one of those little tributaries in God's network of love for them. But there are other tributaries that we can already see. So even though my heart has been really heavy for my friends the last few months, I'm clinging to the good news that there is no brokenness or need that they're experiencing in their lives right now that God doesn't already see. And he cares about my friends more than I do. And because he's already present and at work to bring his healing love to this exact situation that they're in, my family and I just get to join up with God, what God's already doing in practical and impactful ways. And hopefully that'll bring some love and encouragement to their life in a really tough season. It's possible over the last 3 weeks, maybe this morning, as we've been talking about what it looks like to live a blessed lifestyle, God's begun prompting you. And you've begun noticing some ways that he's already at work around you. Maybe you've noticed some needs in the people or places that you interact with regularly. And you've been beginning with prayer, you're practicing sharing intentional meals and taking on the posture of a listener. And in the process, these needs are starting to crop up around you, right? And you see them in ways you didn't see them before. I think sometimes a couple of the biggest barriers we have in going from noticing the needs around us to doing something about them is, one, we don't have time in our schedule. So many of us have scheduled our lives so busy that there's just not space to act on it. And number two, sometimes we just don't have much imagination for how to get started, for what are some practical ways that we could serve others with the time we do have. So we have an opportunity coming up in the next few weeks that could help us with both of those barriers. We call it Neighbor Day. And if you're new to this idea, Neighbor Day has been a tradition for the last several years. We don't gather here on Labor Day weekend.
This Labor Day weekend, we are celebrating Neighbor Day.
Or serving at or preparing for the church gathering by serving others in your community in some practical ways. So that helps with the time barrier. If you're somebody who already carves out time to be here, you have some extra time that weekend to be able to serve people. And to help with the imagination barrier, over the next several weeks, we're going to be talking about Neighbor Day, and we're going to be brainstorming some ideas together about ways that we could get the ball rolling and get serving the people and places around us. So I would love to get that started right now, actually, and hear from you guys. What are some ideas that you've had? Maybe things you've done on past Neighbor Days to bless people around you, or ideas you've had based on some needs you've been seeing, or maybe something you noticed somebody else serving, and you want to say, hey, that was a cool thing, that kind of inspired me. But what are your ideas for how you can serve people around you? Yeah, Jessica. Yes. Yeah, all these teachers getting ready to go back to school. You can see their Amazon wish lists, and you can get involved helping serve them as they get ready to pour into the next generation. That's a great idea. What else? Bake for your neighbors. I knew it would come up. That was kind of like the OG, right? We did the chocolate chip cookie kit in 2020 to try to find ways to serve people. That was awesome. I was the recipient of that one year. That was kind of awesome. That had not happened before. Anybody else? How can you serve? I know my family and I, we're planning to spend our Neighbor Day serving this family I was just talking about, and we're hoping to do some, those of us who are less skilled, do some landscaping. The people who have practical, handyman skills are gonna do some little maintenance things around there. So those are kinds of things you can do. What else? Jerry.
It's something we used to do at school. There's so many people in the nursing homes that are so lonely.
Yeah.
Just to have anybody come and talk to them and listen to them. And most of them have amazing stories to share.
Yeah.
And you can always ask and find out from the people there who doesn't get visitors, who doesn't have anybody to come into them. I don't think there's any way you can go wrong with just going and listening to people and letting them pour their hearts out to you.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be a big project. Sometimes it's just showing up, being present, beginning with prayer, listening, maybe even sharing a meal with somebody who doesn't get to do that with someone very often. That's a great idea. Anybody else? Who we got? Yeah, Rachel.
We were talking about maybe barbecuing for local police and fire department.
Oh, yeah, serving first responders.
Like right there, they share a parking lot, so we like, we showed up with a cooler of ice water and pulled the barbecue grill down there and grilled benefits.
Yeah. They're looking around their neighborhood and they're saying, hey, we have this like outposts of first responders in our own neighborhood. They're going to be working on a holiday weekend. How can we serve them? I love that. Babysitting. Wow. Sharon has an idea here. Guys, babysitting for a young couple so they can get some time for just them. What a great way to serve. It's a great idea. Who else? The more we share these ideas, the more they help us see outside of just like, sometimes we see one thing and we just get stuck in that vein, but hearing what other people have tried or other ideas they have helps us expand our imagination. Anybody? Yeah. Sorry, what was that? Oh yeah, you're just going through the drive-thru. Regular rhythms of life. You can pay for the meal of somebody in front of you, behind you, whatever. Yeah, that's awesome. Okay, guys. So Neighbor Day is coming up in just 4 weeks. So it's time to start getting the ball rolling. If this is a new idea to you, there is info on the app, but we also have a video that kind of walks you through the basic steps of what it looks like to engage with Neighbor Day as a family. So watch this.
This Labor Day weekend, we are celebrating Neighbor Day as you plan to go into your community to be for your neighbors. Here are 5 easy steps you can plan your next Neighbor Day project. Step 1, find a group. Partner with at least one person in or outside your household. It can be family, friends, teammates, coworkers, whoever. Don't forget to register your group on the My MHC app under the Neighbor Day icon. Step 2, brainstorm the project. Explore the possibilities of how your group can meet a specific need in your community. What is your group passionate about? What skills and resources do you have? What connections do you share in common? Step 3, plan the project. Set a date and time, gather supplies, and assign responsibilities. Step 4, do the project. Move out into the community and bless your neighbors. Speaking of bless, don't forget to engage in our 5 bless practices as you carry out your project. Step 5, share your story. Celebrate Neighbor Day with the rest of us by posting pictures or video on social media using the hashtag Neighbor Day 2024. You can even submit your story on the app. Let us know your favorite part of the day or where you saw God at work. And there you have it! Being for your neighbor doesn't have to be complicated, and planning your Neighbor Day project using these 5 simple steps is super easy.
That you're going to encounter in the world that God doesn't already see and care about more than you do. And so as you engage with things like Neighbor Day, remember that God is already present and at work to bring his healing love to every situation, and you just get to partner with him and join up with what he's doing to meet the needs of people and places around you in practical and impactful ways. And I want to remind you that Neighbor Day, that's just one way that we can do this, because this idea of blessing our neighbor, it's not an event on our calendar. It's a way of life and a set of habits and practices that help us become the kind of people that bless the people we encounter all the time, every day, just as a way of life. And as we get ready to head out today, I'd like us to all stand together and pray for just that. So would you guys join me in praying this prayer? Do we have that? Awesome. God, give us eyes to see where you're already at work in the people and places around us. Give us ears to listen perceptively. Give us hearts to feel the needs of our neighbors personally. Give us courage to join you in what you're doing in our community in practical and powerful ways. Amen. Amen.